The New York Stock Exchange has marked its worst week since the 2008 financial crash. By the closing of the bell on Friday, the Dow Jones was down by 913.21 points, a 4.55% drop. Optimism collapsed when New York Governor Andrew Cuomo gave the order for residents to stay at home except in case of an emergency. The New York Stock Exchange has been empty as the exchange moved to purely digital trading earlier in the week in a bid to stem spread of the COVID-19 novel coronavirus. And Trump says a national lockdown is unnecessary.
Governor Cuomo has done in New York, is there any more consideration to a national lockdown to keep people in their homes?
I don't think so. Essentially, you've done that in California, you've done that in New York. Those are really two hotbeds. Those are probably the two hottest of them all in terms of hotspots. I don't think so, because you go out to the Midwest, you go out to other locations, and they're watching it on television, but they don't have the same problems. They don't have, by any means, the same problem.
Mexico is restricting non-essential travel to the United States.
If they send back people that are neither Mexican nor from Central America, Mexico will not accept them. We are going to exhort, we are going to encourage that the population abstains from the border area, firstly for their own decisions from making trips that are non-essential, for their health.
A U.S. patient who tested positive for COVID-19 was evacuated via air ambulance back to the United States. The patient was in good general condition and was transferred with his wife. The evacuation was carried out in response to a request made by himself and relatives. Haiti has revealed its first 2 diagnosed cases of COVID-19. In a press statement at the National Palace, President Jovenel Moïse announced the unidentified patients who tested positive for COVID-19 had been quarantined. He also decreed a curfew and declared a state of sanitary emergency in the country. The curfew will be effective from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. As well, gatherings of more than 10 people are now prohibited, and the population has been advised to maintain social distance to avoid contagions. Moïse also said he would close all airports, schools, factories, and seaports. The Jamaican government reported the country's first COVID-19 death this Thursday. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Wellness disclosed yesterday that the victim was a 79-year-old man who had traveled to New York and had diabetes and hypertension. The deceased was one of 2 patients who tested positive for the virus during the 24 hours preceding the announcement. Jamaica now has 15 confirmed COVID-19 cases.
One of the positive cases that were tested in the 11 is linked to the first patient, patient 1, while the second is our new patient with a travel history from New York.
China has delivered 4,000 COVID-19 test kits, among other medical supplies, to Venezuela to support its fight against the coronavirus crisis. Under crippling U.S. sanctions, the government of President Nicolas Maduro needs all the help to contain the pandemic.
A shipment of 4,000 COVID-19 testing kits has arrived in Caracas from China. Venezuela has also received masks, gloves, protective suits, medications and other medical supplies which will be distributed among 46 hospitals to help the fight against COVID-19.
We will do both selective and mass testing. According to the list of contacts we have traced through confirmed cases and from national surveys in which we have identified areas that are most at risk. We identify which communities are most at risk and we will carry out mass tests here.
As China reported on Thursday, there have been no new local infections for the first time since the coronavirus began, which means President Xi Jinping has been focusing on helping countries like Venezuela contain the pandemic.
This demonstrates the affection and brotherhood between the 2 nations, and also a clear support for the Venezuelan government and people. The Venezuelan government is taking measures to ensure public health despite severe and criminal sanctions.
Venezuela can also count on the constant support and advice of the World Health Organization and Cuban medical experts, including the researcher who had developed the so-called interferon alpha 2B medication, which has been effectively used to treat some COVID-19 patients.
You have to create the conditions that allow the detection of cases and ensure that they can be treated accordingly to the severity of their symptoms. Then you have to trace their contacts and create a whole rapid response network. But we have to make it clear that each country has its own experience when dealing with the disease.
The group of Cuban experts who arrived on Monday are here to provide technical and medical advice to local authorities and work together with doctors of Venezuela's Barrio Adentro mission, which is in charge of preventative measures as well as the detection of suspected cases in various neighborhoods.
One thing which is very important is the spread of information by the media and social media on sanitary measures, so citizens are aware of their responsibility in protecting themselves and their families.
Although Venezuela has received a great deal of support from China and Cuba in its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, the US continues to impose sanctions on Venezuela, curtailing its efforts to deal more effectively with the crisis and needlessly putting millions of lives at risk.
On Thursday, Niger recorded its first coronavirus case in a man returning to Niamey from Togo via Ivory Coast and Burkina Faso, information which was confirmed by the health minister.
Niger has just registered its first case of coronavirus today, Thursday, March 19, 2020. The patient is of Nigerian nationality, aged 36. He's a warehouseman for a land transport company, and he has traveled along the road Lomé, Accra, Ghana, Abidjan, and Ouagadougou.
China has announced this Friday that the United States had tried to stigmatize the country with the coronavirus after U.S. President Donald Trump continued to refer to the new coronavirus as the Chinese virus.
Recently, some people in the United States have been scheming to link the novel coronavirus with China and insistently stigmatizing China. Chinese people are strongly indignant and firmly oppose this. The claims that China has not been transparent and open disregard the facts and confuse right and wrong.
The UN World Food Program says that millions of children are missing meals due to closures triggered by the coronavirus pandemic. The program normally covers 18 million children.
We are indeed very, very affected and concerned by this situation. Many children in the world can only eat their fill and eat a balanced diet if they go to class. So we must now replace the school and school distributions and provide take-home rations by each family. So not only will the children benefit, but the poor families in which these children live will also be able to benefit from these rations.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Luis Almagro has been re-elected as the General Secretary of the Organization of American States. The session was held despite fears of possible COVID-19 contact. Luis Almagro received 23 votes, while Ecuadorian Representative Maria Fernanda Espinosa received just 10 votes. With that, the controversial Uruguayan figure, a key architect of current and ongoing foreign intervention efforts in Venezuela, has been elected as secretary of the organization for the next 5 years.
The votes cast for Luis Almagro Lainez, 23. For Maria Espinosa, Fernanda Espinosa, 10. 23 for Luis Almagro, 10 for Maria Espinosa.
The representative of Mexico rejected the re-election of Luis Almagro for the new period.
The delegation of Mexico takes note of the re-election of Luis Almagro as the Secretary General of the Organization of the American States for the next 5 years. Mexico is convinced of the imperious need for us to revitalize our organization, for it to be able to exercise genuine leadership and not to get bogged into present quarrels. We supported the alternate candidate, the more so because we feel that the march toward genuine gender equality, which is frankly rather absent in organization, would be best served by the election of that female candidate.
In Bolivia, social movements of the MAS are denouncing attempts by the right wing to postpone the date of the upcoming election. Our correspondent in Bolivia, Freddy Morales, has more.
Social movements linked to the MAS political party are rejecting the right wing's attempt to postpone the presidential elections, which are initially set for May 3rd. They will be doing so on the grounds of the state of exception imposed by the de facto government due to the coronavirus health crisis. The social movements also rejected the Supreme Electoral Court's decision to ban around 200,000 voters from rural areas, where the MAS movement has major support. Meanwhile, Acording La Paz suspended a hearing from the second time regarding the electoral ban of former President Evo Morales by the Supreme Electoral Court. Morales intended to run from senator, representing the department of Cochabamba.
Now over to Brazil, where in the midst of the social crisis generated by the COVID-19, Bolsonaro will be cutting over 150,000 beneficiaries from a large-scale welfare program which was implemented under former President Lula da Silva. Brian Muir has the story.
Ever since the days that people like Hippocrates started writing about plagues and their effects on society thousands of years ago, one of the biggest concerns of government officials has been to come up with ways to guarantee that the populace can remain in quarantine, in isolation, to minimize transmission of diseases that don't have cures. And this is why even to this day, conservative administrations like the Boris Johnson administration in the United Kingdom and the Trump administration in the United States are quickly trying to come up with ways to put money in the pockets of the workers that they're demanding stay at home until the transmission of the coronavirus is slowed down. This is why a move by Brazil's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro, today put the world in shock. At a time when every other government's talking about how to mitigate salary losses, the Bolsonaro administration announced that they're removing 158,000 families from the welfare rolls. And this before they've even announced any serious way to mitigate the income loss for all the people that they're beginning to demand stay at home. The backlash that this has caused is just one more event in a very bad week for Jair Bolsonaro. Today, after calling people propagators of fake news for saying that he had contacted the coronavirus, he's announced that maybe he thinks he has it and he's going to have to get a third test. So it's been a very bad week for Bolsonaro, and now it looks like he might have coronavirus after all.
That was Brian Muir in Sao Paulo. Authorities in Russia are rushing to construct a medical facility for coronavirus patients, which is styled after the hospital in China, which was built in record time. It's going to be built in a village which is about 40 miles southwest of Moscow. The facility was inspired by the experience of Chinese partners. City officials said last week, in February, China built a prefabricated hospital with 1,000 beds over a period of 10 days in Wuhan, at the epicenter of its coronavirus epidemic.
Now we are in the middle of constructing an infectious diseases center. The first patients with coronavirus should arrive here in April.
There are more than 30,000 homeless people in Spain. Most of them are being forced by authorities to coop up in overcrowded shelters as the country is under lockdown due to the coronavirus crisis. But many of them remain on the streets, facing the risk of contracting the disease.
Rocío has been living on the streets for months, and being homeless puts her at high risk of contracting the novel coronavirus. Due to her situation, she not only has limited access to hygiene products and running water, but also cannot go into self-isolation, as most of Spain does to combat the COVID-19 pandemic.
The situation is extreme enough that we are on the streets, that we don't have a bathroom or laundry services. But on the top of all of this, we are treated like animals. We are unlucky enough to be on the streets, but we don't even have mobile services to meet our basic needs.
Homeless shelters are now at their limits, and living establishments are heavily restricted. People living in these crowded shelters decry the situation, saying that under these circumstances it is impossible to practice social distancing.
Between 1:30 p.m. when we had lunch and 8 p.m. when we had dinner, we had nothing to eat and we were hungry.
They should also let us go up to the rooms to be able to rest a little. They ask you to constantly to keep a distance. It would be the least that they let people go up to their rooms to rest.
In Spain, there are more than 30,000 homeless people who have quickly become one of the most vulnerable groups during the coronavirus crisis. And according to rights organizations, there has been little to no response from the government.
The state of emergency hadn't planned any immediate measures to address these problems. We are concerned that in the end the collective isolation, putting a lot of people in the same place, will lead to infections, and also that the law will continue ignoring the situation.
While the army tries to disinfect the streets and public spaces, where homeless people tend to stay, oftentimes most of them will remain on the streets, facing the risk of contracting the novel coronavirus.
We'll take one last break. Join us again after this.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The Turkish army announced this Friday that it was withdrawing troops from two cities in Syria's northwestern Idlib region. According to a statement, the Turkish army reiterated from Sarmin and Binish. The move comes just a few hours after Turkish troops were reportedly ambushed along the Aleppo-Latakia highway. Although no casualties were reported, no force has claimed responsibility for the attack, and the information is yet to be officially confirmed. International coalition forces in Iraq have begun to withdraw troops after handing over the first military facility to Iraqi security forces. Iraqi forces officially took control of the Al-Qaim military base close to Syria's border after U.S. Army troops completely withdrew from the area. U.S. coalition forces are set to withdraw from two other military bases in the northern region of Iraq in the following weeks. The withdrawal plan includes Qayyara base south of Mosul and the K-1 base in Kirkuk province. The withdrawal of U.S. troops comes after several bomb attacks against their military bases and increasing calls from the Iraqi population for them to leave the country. At least 29 members of the Malian armed forces were killed in an attack by terrorists in the Gao province in the northeast of the country. Malian armed forces reported the deaths of 29 troops and another 5 wounded following the attack in the city of Tarkint. The attack occurred in the early morning hours of this Thursday. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. After the 2012 coup in Mali, the country has seen increased tensions and violence, with Tuareg rebel groups and jihadist organizations having occupied the north of the country for 10 months. French military intervention helped to expel the militia groups, but several regions remain in an uncontrolled state.
In 1 month, analysts say.
President Rouhani congratulated the Iranian nation at home and overseas on Nowruz and the beginning of the year 1399. In a message marking the New Year holiday, Rouhani promised that the country would overcome one of the world's deadliest coronavirus outbreaks with unity, effort, cooperation, and the efforts of doctors, and congratulated all doctors, nurses, and medical staff who are now beside patients, especially those who've been infected with the virus. He also spoke on what he called the cruelest assassination against the great commander, Qasem Soleimani.
The most severe sanctions in history are imposed on our people by international terrorists. The oil industry is subject to the most severe sanctions. But our great nation has withstood these ordeals, and our people have written an epic new page by turning the economy of the country without oil, for the first time in decades. We were not defeated. We resisted the American pressure and came out victorious. We will overcome the coronavirus by being united and with the effort and cooperation, and with the efforts of the doctors.
This is the year of the leap in production. Here is the slogan for this year. The responsible parties must act in a way that the production makes a leap and a significant difference in the lives of the people.
Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said in a message on the occasion of Nowruz that to make the world that will emerge from the COVID-19 a better one, all must seize the opportunity to forge a new path and denounce the continued criminal U.S. sanctions.
We are all in this together. To better confront the virus, we need to better work together. But to get there, the war on multilateralism, international cooperation, and the rule of law must come to an end. And those who passively comply with the whims of unilateralist bullies must wake up to the reality that they're also responsible for the destructive ramifications of aggressive unilateralism. I can assure you that we Iranians, relying on millennia of civilizations and unified national resilience, will overcome these challenges and emerge as a stronger and more compassionate community. I wholeheartedly wish the same for all my fellow human beings. But we human beings are capable of adopting a more empathic and eventually a more prudent approach towards one another, one premised on mutual respect and equal footing. It takes will, courage, and moral imperative. And if we are to make the world that will emerge from COVID-19 a better one, it is vital that we seize the opportunity to forge a new path.
Here is the latest from Iran. The country's deputy of health minister reported from his daily press conference that 1,046 new people have become infected with coronavirus during the past 24 hours. 149 more people died during that period, and 5,979 people have recovered in total since the outbreak of coronavirus in Iran. Given the latest figures of the health ministry, the total number of people diagnosed with the virus has reached 18,407 people, out of whom 1,284 people have died. Professor, writer, and internationalist Tim Anderson spoke recently slamming the Western corporate media for its irrevocable commitment to an interventionist agenda. He also remarked on the popular support for the Syrian Arab army and President Assad during a decade of siege by the West.
They are bad losers. The US in particular is very upset that they haven't been able to destroy Damascus or break up Syria into little, an Alawi state and a Shia state or a Sunni state or whatever, or a Druze dependency of Israel or whatever they wanted to do with it. They haven't been able to do that. Because in Syria in particular, of all of the entities that's popular, the Syrian army is extremely popular. That's one thing I was convinced of from the very beginning. Why? Because it's a genuinely pluralist state, and people from every sect and every community participate in that, and they've all lost family members there. Well over 100,000 soldiers have been killed. Syrian soldiers have been killed defending that country, and the army is, and they're still fighting and dying in Idlib there, and it's enormously popular. And if you think back to the early days, the hope was of the, including, shamefully, we had a foreign minister in my country said that he wanted to see the assassination of the Syrian president and a big defection from the army, that the army would split on sectarian lines, the Sunni there and other there. It didn't happen. They lost maybe 1,000, 2,000 to the gangs, so they came from very extremist Sunni families or whatever, but basically the army held together and the people supported the army, and that's the only way a little country like that could survive this enormous onslaught, basically. So war crimes, had Assad been killing his own people, they wouldn't have had that support to maintain almost a decade of struggle against Turkey and Israel and the US and France and Britain and Germany and all the others, and the fighters that came from 80-something countries. They wouldn't have survived had this man been the monster that the Western media portrayed him as.
And with that, we've reached the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesdarenglish.net. And join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telestar English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.